Hello, everyone. Australia and China share no land borders, no territorial disputes, and no historical enmity. Even the distance between their two capitals is too far to cause irritation at 9,017 kilometers. Yet Australia sees China as threat number one that must be planned against. Why is that? Let's find out. In 1986, in a defense assessment, the Australian government described as follows: "We are one of the safest countries in the world because we are far from the center of global military confrontations." That meant they could always sleep tight at night. However, in a new assessment of the current situation, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's government has concluded Australia's strategic circumstances have fundamentally changed and China poses the number one threat. Not because they fear an invasion, but because of damages that could occur in the future. First is the economic aspect. Australia was bullied by China in 2020. The Australian government daringly called for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19, with accusations that Beijing was the culprit. Right after that, an unprecedented wave of sanctions occurred. China imposed high tariffs on Australian barley, kicking the $1 billion industry out of this market overnight. After the incident, the Australian government did not back down. It even spoke out criticizing Beijing for sleazily wielding economic coercion. Incensed, China increased the scale of sanctions. They revoked licenses of Australia's biggest beef exporters. At the same time, they stopped buying coal and cotton, and sharply raised tariffs on wine. They banned the clearance of wheat, wool, lobster, sugar, timber. The Chinese ambassador presented a list of 14 grievances and demanded Australia rectify in order for relations to return to normal. This included the Canberra government's support of media outlets saying wrongful and unfriendly things about Beijing, sponsoring anti-China research at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, accusing Beijing of attacking cybersecurity without citing clear evidence, being the first country to condemn China at the UN over unlawful claims of the Nine-Dash Line in the South China Sea. There was also interference in human rights issues in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and threats against Taiwan. Through the 14 grievances, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian declared, "Whoever tied the bell on the tiger must untie it," implying that the Canberra government caused the deterioration in relations between the two sides, so they must be the ones to resolve it. With China accounting for nearly 40% of Australia's exports, many thought the consequences of defiance would be very serious. However, the actual impact was quite mild. Australia sought to redirect trade to other countries. The most prominent example is coal. After China stopped importing Australian coal, they turned to Russia and Indonesia to replace it. It was thought to be an unexpected success, but Russian and Indonesian coal could not suddenly increase production, leading to shortages in supplying India, Japan, and South Korea. Australia quickly jumped into those markets and became the new supplier. Thanks to high global energy prices, they earned more money than any year before when dealing with China. Many other Australian industries also applied similar tactics. As a result, barley was redirected to Saudi Arabia and Southeast Asia, copper to Europe and Japan. Overall, the effects of China's trade restrictions were only like ripples on the water's surface. That is why the Canberra government did not comply with any of the 14 grievances raised by Beijing. In fact, China has one card they have not used, or more precisely, do not dare use. Iron ore is Australia's main export item, and most goes to China. Banning it would have a stronger effect. However, Australia supplies 70% of China's iron ore, an important material in their booming steel and construction industries. It is unclear who is in the superior position. They are afraid that if a ban is imposed, they would not know where else to import from. Although not suffering much damage, the Australian government envisioned a bleak scenario that could occur in the future during a larger conflict. China would certainly use pressure to coerce concessions. Not only regarding trade, the Canberra government also worries Beijing would use military might with their system of seaports everywhere to blockade Australia's shipping routes. Therefore, they planned a fundamental change in defense strategy in 2021. Australia cancelled a $40 billion contract to buy conventional submarines from France. Instead, they cooperated with the UK and US to develop nuclear-powered submarines, starting with at least 8 vessels for a cost of at least $100 billion. This is the first time the US and UK have shared their top-secret nuclear submarine technology that has much greater range and deadliness compared to diesel submarines. Through the AUK-US agreement with the two giants, Australia not only received security assurances but also access to new US military technologies. The United States plans to deploy B-52 bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons to northern Australia to aid their defense. At the same time, they will sell advanced missiles with over 500 kilometers range. Australia also plans to upgrade seaports and bases in the north, stretching from the Cocos Islands in the Indian Ocean to the city of Townsville in the northeast. These have received support from most of the public, so the highly democratic Australian government can act freely without fear of opposition. In addition to ensuring smooth trading, Australia has another concern about China, the issue of Taiwan. It would seem irrelevant, but it is not simple. According to Australia's Department of Defence assessment, the scale of China's military buildup is the largest of any country since World War II ended. Their defense budget has increased rapidly from $135 billion in 2016 to $230 billion in 2022. China currently leads in hypersonic weapons and has surpassed the US in number of warships, 340 compared to 300. They are also developing their nuclear arsenal to a new level, from 400 to 1,500 warheads. What does this mean? It means Beijing's ambitions are no small matter. Australian officials argue as follows: if China succeeds in annexing Taiwan, it means the US fails. And if the US fails, Australia's security would not be assured. At that point, Beijing would become the dominant power in the Indo-Pacific region. Then ultimately Australia would be forced to follow China's path or suffer the consequences. It sounds a bit vague, but this shows a far-sighted vision of Beijing becoming a superpower and bullying nations that refuse to submit. That is the reason. Australia is very active alongside ally the US in opposing China on all fronts, from human rights issues to disputes in the South China Sea. Although there are no binding treaties, it is very likely that if war breaks out in the Taiwan Strait, Australia would join with the US. This is not a subjective assessment. In the past, they fought together with the US in World Wars I and II, the Korean War, Vietnam War, Gulf War, and counter-terrorism operations. Any conflict affecting national interests, they would be present. According to polls in Australia, the majority of citizens support sending forces to defend Taiwan, as long as the United States does as well. Defense Minister Richard Marles has also emphasized it is unimaginable that Australia would not participate. Therefore, in addition to Japan, the US has another close ally ready to join the fight. China would find it very difficult to act rashly without certainty of success. If you found this video interesting and useful, feel free to subscribe for our latest updates.